Sir Alex Ferguson, the man, the myth, the legend. United have fallen a pretty long way since he left, haven't they? Considering we just won our triumphant 20th title in 2013, thanks to a lot of help from Robin van Persie. So we won our 20th title that year. Since then, we've got from there to the position that we are in now under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer in 2020. 7 years without winning the league title. 7 years of inconsistencies. 7 years of players going in and players going out. 7 years of uncertainty. 7 years of the Glazers. 7 years of Ed Woodward. 7 years of players that, some of whom didn't want to wear the United shirt. So I'm going to explore all of that. I'm doing a 3-part series now, so this is the first of 3 videos that I'm going to look at on this topic. I want to look at the contributing factors to the position that Man United are in now and how we got here. And for me, it's split evenly into 3 categories. So I'm going to be talking about the managers, the players, and the board. So I think there are several factors to consider when you look at how did Man United get from where we were in 2013 to the position that we're in now in 2020. So I'm going to examine all 3 of those factors, and in this video I'm going to look into the managers. So I'm going to jump straight in. We're going to pick up where we left off in 2013. So United have just won the league. You've got Robin van Persie, who's in the form of his career. Just scored a ridiculous amount of goals, 28 goals for us in the league. Season before that, he was banging them in for Arsenal. So, best striker in the league on our team. Still got Wayne Rooney, although sort of old, fading a little bit perhaps. But some other good players. Shinji Kagawa, Michael Carrick, Vidic Ferdinand Evra, although again, getting slightly older now. But still, we have a very good team. So the interesting thing about David Moyes, he comes into the club and he straight away wants to impart his own agenda onto the club, which is perfectly fine. But he didn't sell anyone other than Wilfried Zaha. And that was still a decision that he only made after pre-season. And obviously we've all heard the stories about Wilfried Zaha, potentially something happening between him and David Moyes' daughter. And I'm led to believe that there is some credibility to that story. However, that's not what we're here to talk about today. So David Moyes comes in, and we're on pre-season. We look pretty good. We've got good players. We've got Van Persie, Januzaj, Kagawa. This kid called Januzaj looks really good in pre-season. Looks excellent. So we're interested to see how this kid's going to do. Got Johnny Evans sort of making appearances. You've still got Smalling and Jones, who at this point are still promising players. Which is quite different to how we see them both now. So, it's been sort of speculated a lot that David Moyes was out of his depth at Manchester United. And I think that is fair to be said. I mean, we've all sort of seen the interviews afterwards. I mean, at the time, all the players and everything were saying that he was the right man for the job. And I guess that's just the nature of football. You don't really out people at the time. It all sort of comes out afterwards. And that's definitely what happened here. I mean, I think the first big mistake that he made came sort of right at the beginning. He brought a bunch of coaching staff in from Everton, like Phil Neville. There was a couple of other guys that he brought in as well. So he brings in a bunch of coaching staff from Everton, and that in turn leads to Rene Meulenstein, who was a very successful first-team coach under Alex Ferguson for years and years and years. Also Mike Phelan, who had been there for quite a long time as well. Both of them two decided to leave because they didn't see where this would all leave them. So I think that was the first mistake, in that these two had been a massive part of the continuity in the last few years under Ferguson that had kept the side together. So I think he tried to change a lot too early, and I think whilst it was good for him to put his own stamp on the team, I think every manager should want to do that in football, to put their own philosophy onto a team. I think when something's been successful for so long, and a lot of the players in there have been sort of the backbone of that team, like if you look at Ferdinand, Carrick, Vidic, Evra, Like, the spine of that team had been there for 5 years, really. So they've all been there a long time. I think it was reasonable to expect that they wouldn't necessarily be too happy with loads and loads of changes. But I do want to say as well that whilst David Moyes potentially was out of his depth, I think that we can't underestimate the enormity of the job that he had. Because this is something that I'm going to cover as well in the board video, but David Gill left at the same time as Sir Alex Ferguson. So there was a backroom change as well, like a back office change, where Moyes had to then work with Ed Woodward, who was also new to the club. So I think that for Moyes, that was definitely a challenging situation. And you look at some of the signings that he was trying to make in his first summer. He was trying to get people like Cruz and Fabregas, and we continued to be linked with these players through the whole season. And Cruz has come out and said since that we were actually very close to signing him, and he decided not to come. He decided not to come to us on the basis that Louis van Gaal joined us. So potentially, if we'd have kept David Moyes for another season, we'd have had Toni Kroos. I mean, I have never liked Toni Kroos, but I know there's a lot of United fans that would have been very happy to have him. Some people have said that he's sort of the second coming of Paul Scholes. So I think Moyes was a little bit unfortunate when it came to the transfer side of things, because he wasn't helped by the board. He signed Fellaini after that ridiculous thing with Fellaini's release clause, where we sort of waited for it to run out. And I still don't understand why we did that. We waited for his release clause to come out and then had to pay about 15 million more than we otherwise would have done for Fellaini. The interesting thing is, Moyes' season, it started quite well. We had a 4-1 win over Swansea with Van Persie scoring 2 goals. I think Rooney notched a couple of assists in that game as well. We then drew our second game against a defensive Chelsea team managed by Jose Mourinho, which I don't think anyone would argue was not a bad result. It was not a bad result. We knew Chelsea would set up very defensively, so 0-0 at home. We didn't want to lose that early. So I think that can't be considered a bad result. However, we had a very difficult start to that season. We had to play Chelsea, Liverpool and City within the first 5 games, and I don't think that helped David Moyes either. So I believe we then lost to Liverpool 1-0. We then lost to Liverpool 1-0, and that was frustrating, but it was sort of a bit of it happens. There wasn't an immediate concern over David Moyes because we lost to Liverpool 1-0. It was just one of those games. It was a scrappy old game where neither team played that well, and they just happened to score a goal against us. But we then bounced back with a win, I believe, over Crystal Palace. And then we got thumped. We got absolutely spanked 4-1 by Manchester City. And that was when it was like, at this point, it wasn't David Moyes is out of his depth. It was just this team, our team, is not challenging for the Premier League this season. You can't lose 2 of your first 5 games and then challenge for the Premier League title. So I think it was a game after that we ended up losing to West Brom. I remember being at that game. We lost 2-1 to West Brom. It was like Morgan Amalfitano, and no one even knows who that guy is anymore, scored against us, and then Saido Berahino got the second one. They beat us 2-1. So West Brom beat us, and then that's when I started thinking, damn, we are in trouble. Like, we are in trouble this season, and we're in danger of not qualifying for the Champions League. And obviously you still stick with the manager, just like you stick with the players. Like, you sign players that you don't like, and then you still back them up. But if it's your team, and even if they sign a manager that, it's an appointment that you don't believe in, you still back it up. But what I would say is, after those early defeats, it was kind of inconsistent from that point onwards. We never really strung a good period of we never really strung good wins together under Moyes. We didn't really ever string anything together. We had games where we played good football, like one-off games where we would play good football. We never really strung anything together. And I think that there's been people that have said things, as many people, if you listen to this video, you will know about anyway. So Rio Ferdinand basically has spoken he's spoken quite a bit over the years about David Moyes, actually. And he said in his book, he was talking, there was a passage in Rio Ferdinand's book where he basically spoke about some of the things that Moyes changed. And that they used to have a Friday evening meal of chips, and he took that away. And they were all really pissed off about it. And that, I don't know, maybe that says more about some of the players. But Moyes basically came in, took all that away, made it quite rigid and disciplined. And he basically said that he thought some of the players were overweight. But what Rio said is that because he wanted to change everything, it created a bit of negativity. It was like, okay, so what we've been doing for the last 5 years that has been winning us everything, that's not good enough anymore. So I can understand where Rio's coming from on that. And that Rio has also said over the years that Moyes' tactics were very like Everton tactics, like very small team tactics, often booting the ball long. And to be honest, when I was watching this as a fan, I could see that. Like, we were playing a lot of hopeful balls upfield and sort of worrying about what the other team was going to do to us, rather than looking at how we can play the ball through them or how we can enforce a style of football onto them. So, and the fact that we had an amazing striker in Robin van Persie, and I know that his form under David Moyes was not the best, and that's something that I'm definitely looking to cover when I go onto the players video. His form under Moyes was not the best, but Moyes did not play to his strengths either. Moyes didn't play to Van Persie's strengths at all, and he was looking to sign. We were linked with Edison Cavani for like that whole season. And why do you want Cavani when you've got Van Persie up front? I mean, Cavani's not a bad player. I've actually never particularly rated him. But I think he's perfect for that sort of long ball football. Like, just chase everything, good work rate, big, strong, physical, quite quick. Like, he's good for that sort of, not lower league, but sort of mid-table football, very direct style of play. Because Van Persie is a class footballer. Apart from the goal scoring, he's just got such good touch, incredible. So I did find it odd that we kept being linked with Cavani when we had this guy up front that's just this amazing player, like almost a once in a generation player as far as the particular set of attributes that he had. Anyway, there was a lot of talk about the sort of passing that we would do, and again, another comment from Rio. Moyes would say that, he used to say, apparently, in the dressing room, he would say, we only had 400 passes last time, we need 600 passes now. And I mean, that's just a ridiculous thing for a manager to say. I mean, I do think that Rio Ferdinand obviously was dropped by Moyes and didn't play very much, so I do think that he may have potentially an agenda in that. So he may be saying things, exaggerating things a little bit to where they're a bit worse than they were. But I still think there's no smoke without fire. He's not just going to say something outrageous like that. And to be honest, some of these things are ringing true. If you look at some of the games that we played, where we're just booting the ball upfield and hoping someone would get on the end of it. Alternatively, there was that game of Fulham where we literally we had about 80 crosses. We had 80 crosses, and then there was that video of Moyes after the game saying, we crossed it. And that was all because of the fact that we had like 80 crosses, about 4 shots, and we managed to get 2 goals. But it was just ridiculous, the fact that we wouldn't try anything different. And I remember in the first Olympiacos game, when we lost 2-0, there was so many balls just being booted down the line so that someone could try and cross it in. And you had Shinji Kagawa making himself available in the number 10 spot. And then people just weren't giving him the ball because we were stuck in this sort of style of football. I think you could definitely see that the body language was not there as well. Like, as the season went on, the body language just deteriorated from the team. Like the Liverpool game where we lost 2-0, this was at home. I went to that game also this season, and I don't think I've ever seen as bad of a Man United performance as when we lost 2-0 to Liverpool. We were literally booting the ball out of play. There was no passion, there was no work ethic, no anything. So, another thing that I wanted to talk about, again, we've gone a bit further along the line, but I believe David Moyes made a big mistake by giving Wayne Rooney such a big new contract. And this might be somewhat controversial because I know a lot of United fans do love Wayne Rooney, and I know a lot of England fans love Wayne Rooney. But the reality was, at the time, he was on his way down. Ferguson had seen that the season before. That's why Ferguson was going to get rid of him. Especially after Rooney demanded a transfer. So he demanded a transfer and held the club at ransom. David Moyes rewards him with the captaincy and a new 5-year contract worth about 300k a week. So that's what happens when you hold your club to ransom. And that in itself, whilst probably didn't have any direct impact on the way that we played football, sets a bad precedent. If you're going to do that, it don't matter how good you are. If you're holding a club to ransom, you shouldn't be the captain. Why do you think Paul Pogba never gets made the captain of Man United? Why do you think that never happens? Because he's always angling, or his agent is always angling for a move. So this was the same with Rooney. And I think it's my personal belief that if Ferguson had stayed, we'd have sold Rooney and we'd have used Kagawa as a number 10 behind Van Persie, and then Hernandez would have alternated with that. So I think the tactics and the formation were definitely poor, and the football was limited. And I think when you look at a manager, it's not just about how much they win and what results they get and the style of play. It's not all about that. It's about how they make you feel when your team is on the field. And I think this is a big thing with David Moyes, because he started to make United fans, myself included, he started to make me not like certain players. I really didn't like Robin Van Persie when Robin Van Persie was playing under David Moyes. He started to make me not like the team and not like watching them play. And he didn't really give us those wow moments. Like, you know, sometimes you get those incredible performances, like the PSG performance last year. And I would say after all the managers after Ferguson, David Moyes has given us the least of those as far as the wow factor. So he didn't really give us those wow factors, those sort of wow moments. There was one against Olympiacos when we came back and beat them 3-0 when Robin Van Persie scored a hat-trick. That was incredible, and let's not take that away. And there was also the draw at home against Bayern, which again, that was sort of relegation football at its finest. We literally just pinned ourselves back and refused to be broken down by them. I mean, we went and lost the leg 3-1, but it's because the performance was quite heroic. I remember being really happy with that after the game because of how badly we'd been playing in the league at the time. So I think if we want to round up David Moyes' time at Manchester United, I think he could have been given a little bit more time as far as when he got sacked, but I think they were fed up with him. They were fed up with his style of football. I think you could always make a case for any manager having more time, technically. I mean, he could have had more time. If you look at the time that some of the other managers have had, he certainly could have been given more. But it's a case of I don't think he'd showed very much to turn it around. He hadn't shown any sort of philosophy to take the team forward, despite changing like everything about the club. He hadn't shown any philosophy. We were worried about what other teams were going to do. We were literally playing diagonal punts down the field. But if I'm being honest, he made 2 signings. So he made the signings of Fellaini and the signings of Juan Mata. And I mean, he pretty much froze out Ferdinand. But Ferdinand, I think, was on his way out anyway. So I don't think David Moyes, whilst we remember that as quite a bad season of football, we do, because we finished 7th, and it was the first time we'd finished 7th in a long time. I think overall, David Moyes had to follow Ferguson. That was never going to be easy. But I think this video is about the impact of these managers on Manchester United and how we've got to where we are. And do I think David Moyes was instrumental in how far we've fallen? Not really. I don't. And I think what I'm going to say about the next 2 managers of this team are going to tell you why I think that. Because I think David Moyes, he left us disappointed in a bad season. But I don't think he didn't leave the club in a miles worse position than the one he got it in. When he got it, it was a team full of ageing players who had just won something big, but should have still been doing well in the league. He underachieved with that team, and left a team of ageing players who were still, reasonably talented. So that's the David Moyes section over. I don't want to talk too much about David Moyes because it sounds like you're hating when you talk about someone that much. And yeah, I just think it was a really hard job for him if we're being completely fair. So I'm going to move on to Louis van Gaal. Louis van Gaal. So Louis van Gaal was almost it happens a lot in football. If you see a team try something and it goes wrong, a lot of the time they'll try and do something that's completely different. So Louis van Gaal was essentially the opposite of Moyes, because Moyes was someone who was sort of seen as tactically simplistic and hadn't managed anyone enough at the top level, wasn't experienced enough at the top level. Whereas Louis van Gaal is the complete opposite of that. He'd won things at Barcelona, at Ajax. He'd won the Bundesliga with Bayern Munich. He got into a Champions League final with them as well. So he'd pretty much been everywhere and done most of what there was to do in football, but he'd never been to the Premier League. So we got Louis van Gaal, and it wasn't. I mean, I don't really remember who else was about at the time or who was available at the time. But all I remember thinking is, this guy sounds like a safe bet. I don't think he was my favourite choice, but I didn't think it was a bad choice at the time. So Louis van Gaal comes in, and I'll tell you what I liked about Louis van Gaal is I think he was complete opposite to Moyes in that he was very bold with everything and he had a philosophy. Like, he had a specific philosophy. He knew how he wanted his team to play. Whether or not that way was for you, it's that's down to personal opinion. But he comes straight in and he moves out Ferdinand, Vidic and Evra. And that's like the fulcrum of the back four that we'd had for the last sort of 5. And, Ferdinand had been there for 10 years at the time, close to 10 years. So he moved out an essential part of the team and then brought in his own players. But I think that was something that I personally liked, because I was like, this team does need to evolve. I mean, Vidic and Evra wanted to leave, and I think Ferdinand did as well. So I think it made sense for all parties. So we moved some of the old players out, and this mental summer, so after Moyes left in 2014, the summer of 2014 was absolutely mental, and we just brought in so many players. And it was like, I think it was the biggest influx of players I'd ever seen at Manchester United. So it was kind of like next season, it was kind of like watching a whole new team play. So we had Van Gaal he liked versatility players. So he brought in players such as Rojo, Darmian and Blind that could sort of play in multiple positions. So Daley Blind could play centre-back, left-back or defensive midfield. Rojo could play at centre-back or left-back, and Darmian could obviously play centre-back or right-back. So he would buy these players that were quite good as far as versatility goes. He seemed to like players of that ilk. He also signed Ander Herrera, Di Maria, and he signed Falcao on loan, which was a risky signing. So Falcao on loan, again, this is debatable how much of this was him. Louis van Gaal's admitted in a previous interview that it was his idea for that signing to be a loan. But, I mean, we had, whether it was him or the board, we imposed some ridiculous terms on that loan. Like, Falcao needed to score about 5 goals and play over 10 games in order to earn a permanent contract, which, as we know, didn't happen. But we had something ridiculous like that in his contract, where he was coming off of an ACL injury, so it was such a big risk to sign him. And again, it's difficult to know whether to blame Van Gaal for that or not, really. But, if we're being honest as United fans, we were all very excited at the start of that season. Having players like Di Maria, Van Persie, Rooney, Falcao, all of them lot playing together, that seemed absolutely fantastic. I mean, in reality, the team was very unbalanced. It was very, very unbalanced. We didn't have any wingers. We didn't really have anyone that could play wide, and that was what sort of led to the emergence of Jesse Lingard in some ways, is that we needed players that could play in the sort of wide attacking positions. So we had Di Maria, but other than that, there was all these strikers. We had so many strikers. We had Welbeck, we had Hernandez was still hanging around, we had Falcao, Van Persie, although Van Gaal actually did get rid of Hernandez. I think we loaned him the first season, then got rid of him the second season. So, as far as his management of the team in that first season, I think it was a bit of a mixed bag. At the start, we played some excellent attacking football. I mean, Di Maria was absolutely ripping the Premier League up, and he looked like he was going to be an absolute class act for us. So, the problem that we had was defence. And I think we almost knew that was going to be a problem, because Van Gaal sold all of our best defenders, and they didn't really bring good defenders in. He brought in Darmian and Rojo. And Darmian, to be fair, was pretty good in that first season, if we're being completely fair to him. But then he got injured, and Van Gaal converted Valencia to a fullback, which I think has to go down as a good move, because Valencia ended up being one of the best fullbacks in the league for about the next 3 seasons after that. So I don't think you can slate him for that. Now, what I would say is Robin Van Persie that season. Robin Van Persie has struggled for form under David Moyes, and a lot of that was because I believe he didn't really want to play under Moyes. I think he believed Ferguson was going to be the manager for longer. So, Van Persie and Van Gaal had a previous relationship and friendship. So they had worked together for Holland, and they'd known each other even before that. So Van Gaal had managed Holland in the World Cup. Van Persie had had an excellent tournament. So we as United fans, I believe justifiably, thought that this was going to be... Van Persie was just going to carry on from where he left off in the 2013 season, where he basically won us the title on his own. We thought he was going to kick on from that and regain his sort of world-class form. So we believed that was what was going to happen. However, it didn't. Van Persie was very inconsistent. At one point, he went 10 games without a goal, and Van Gaal decided to persist with him, which I understand. I think that sometimes players do need to play themselves back into form, but it doesn't look like a very good decision looking back on it, because Van Persie ends up leaving the club. So I think he could have done more as far as rotating the starting lineup. We had loads of options up front. It wasn't like we were short in that particular area. So we were quite inconsistent for a long time under Van Gaal. We got knocked out of the FA Cup by MK Dons, and that was a diabolical moment, but that was a game in which we played our reserves. We hadn't really tried to win that game, I don't think. We just didn't think... Well, we didn't think we would need to try to win that game. We got battered away to MK Dons, 4-0. So that was sort of a standout moment from Van Gaal's reign as far as like a negative moment to sum things up. But let's not forget, I do think this first season is important to remember, because it was very different to Van Gaal's second season in charge. In the lead up to January, it didn't look like we were going to make Champions League. We were sort of stumbling, we were losing games that we shouldn't. Some of the players were underperforming. Falcao had not picked up any form. Di Maria was struggling. Van Persie was struggling. Rooney was a bit on and off. So things weren't looking too great for us at that particular point in the season. However, we went on to do quite well. In February-March time, we had a 6-game winning run under Louis van Gaal, where we played some really excellent football. It was kind of like a B-Tech tiki-taka, if you like. We had a midfield of Michael Carrick, who was playing brilliantly in that particular stage of the season. So I had Michael Carrick, Ander Herrera and Fellaini in sort of a triangle, where Ander Herrera would play on the right of it, Fellaini would play on the left of it. Ashley Young played on the left wing, and then we would have Juan Mata on the right-hand side. And I remember having like this triangular link-up between Mata, Valencia and Herrera that worked really, really well. And we played some absolutely riveting football. So in this 6-game run, we beat Man City 4-2 at home, and then we beat Liverpool 2-1 away. It was absolutely insane. I loved that point. Like, I think, again, what I was talking about with feel-good moments, this was a feel-good moment, and I think this 6-game winning run, whilst it wasn't reflective of the entire season, it did give us some serious hope for the next season under Van Gaal, because if we could sign the right players to make our team a little bit more balanced so that we could sort of find more consistency, so if we could sign a good defence and maybe a few better midfielders, we'd have a good chance of doing well sort of the season after that. But after that we flopped a little bit in the league. We did flop a little bit. Got knocked out of the Europa League. And then this is where it moves us on to the next season. I was really excited going into this season, into the would have been the 2015 to 16 season. I was really excited under Van Gaal, but then he signed Schweinsteiger and Schneiderlin at the same time. I was like, those are two decent signings. Like, that's going to add to our midfield quite seriously. And then he goes and he sells Di Maria. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. What are you doing? Because I understood at that point that Di Maria wanted to go, but we weren't really linked to any attacking players. So I was like, who's going to provide that creative attacking threat? And I was worried at that point. So we signed Memphis Depay. So he was supposed to be the new attacking threat in our team. So Memphis Depay was supposed to be the new creative attacking threat. So I was worried, but I was still cautiously optimistic. I was like, Schneiderlin and Schweinsteiger, stick them three in a midfield three with Herrera. Schneiderlin can gradually replace Carrick. You've got Schweinsteiger as a box-to-box and Herrera as sort of a more attacking box-to-box. In a 4-3-3, that will do nicely. And Van Gaal decides, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to play a 4-2-3-1 with two flat centre midfielders, often being Schneiderlin and Schweinsteiger or Carrick and Schneiderlin. I think he even started playing Carrick and Schweinsteiger towards the end of it, and I could tell, I could tell from pre-season that this was just not going to work. Because they were sitting far too deep. We just had two flat centre midfielders sitting in front of our back four. It's not dissimilar, actually, to what Solskjaer's been doing this season. It's not dissimilar, but the thing is, we know Solskjaer's a counter-attacking manager, whereas Van Gaal was a manager that liked to keep the ball. So, in that context, I just didn't understand the formation change at all. It didn't make sense. So we were doing that. We had those two centre midfield. I think we carried on with one matter on the right, played Ashley Young on the left, and then Depay and Rooney up front. So we played Depay and Rooney up front. So Depay was playing as like a number 10, which just to me made no sense. And he was not built for the Premier League, as we've all since figured out. Again, a lot of this can come in the players video. I know I keep saying it. So we ended up just sort of being very inconsistent throughout that season. And he you know what? Herrera was one of our best players in Van Gaal's first season, but he decided to drop him. So we were just left with this flat midfield. And I think that if he'd have continued with the 4-3-3 that we had, but stuck Schneiderlin at the base of it, Schweinsteiger on the left side to maybe alternate with Fellaini, and then Herrera on the right side, I think we'd have done okay. I think we'd have we wouldn't have challenged for the title because there wasn't enough creativity to do that, but we could have had a similar result to what we did the previous season. But we just had such a lack of attacking threat all the time. We just couldn't. We didn't sign any creative attacking players. We were playing this crap formation, and then we just didn't have any threat. I mean, one thing that you have to credit Van Gaal for is he brought through Anthony Martial. So he didn't bring him through; he signed him. But that was an incredible signing. So this season in particular that I'm talking about, without Martial, we'd have been nowhere. The goals that he scored in the first half of the season Again, he was playing in a team that was playing this terrible possession football that was horrible to watch. Like, we would have 70% of possession and we would have 2 or 3 shots. And Martial would come into that team and he'd find a way to score goals. And I was like, this kid is absolutely insane. Like, this kid's incredible. And then what does he do? He decides to go. He goes back to the original formations. He goes 4-2-3-1 again. Sticks Martial out on the left to play Rooney up front. And Rooney at this point was shit. You know what I mean? I say this as a guy that I loved Wayne Rooney when he was first at United, and I love him now because he's a legend of the club. But at this time, he was done. And I say that objectively. He was not a top footballer anymore. He was not a top footballer. We shouldn't have been sacrificing who had been one of our best players that season to play Rooney up front. It just shouldn't have happened that way. We'd already seen the first few games that Rooney was awful up front. So we were eliminated from the Champions League in the group stages. And this was mainly just due to a lack of attacking threat. We ended up losing 2 games to Bayer Leverkusen that we were dominating, but they just ended up being very clinical, like a lot more clinical than we were. A positive thing about this season, what I would say, is that he brought the best out of Chris Smalling, and he did bring through Jesse Lingard and Marcus Rashford. So I think Louis van Gaal actually contributed quite heavily to where United are now. And I'll break it down very quickly. I feel as though he did some really good things in his first year and he set us on a good path. And then he undid some of his own good work. He undid that. So he had a good 4-3-3 system that we were playing in the first year, and he decided inexplicably to get rid of that. And that change in formation, along with, you know, a lack of creative personnel, just resulted in some really terrible performances. And once again, just a lack of feel-good moments, even though he created those in the first season, and the crowd were loving him that first season. I think he did do some positive things for the team, because he brought Anthony Martial to the club, he brought through Jesse Lingard, and he brought through Marcus Rashford. So I think you can't knock him for those. But I think his insistence upon playing Schweinsteiger, and even playing Schweinsteiger and Carrick a lot in the centre of midfield, that was just bad management, because those two, it was obvious they would not work. Like, I remember the Arsenal game where them two just got passed to pieces. They just couldn't catch up. They were both too slow. And Schneiderlin, a lot of people slate him and act like he stepped up to the top level of United and he just weren't good enough. And a lot of people act like that's the narrative. And I mean, maybe it is. But I do think that his confidence was probably a bit knocked. And I think if he'd have played at the base of a 4-3-3, just holding in midfield and allowing, you know, the other players to do the things that needed to be done in attack, I actually think Morgan Schneiderlin could have had a decent career at Man United. I might be slightly unpopular, like that might be a slightly unpopular opinion, and people will point to the fact that he's now left United and he's done absolutely nothing. But I actually think football's a game of momentum, and I think that certain things can kill a footballer's career. So I think Schneiderlin could have been okay had Van Gaal played him a bit more. So from where Van Gaal was when he started with the team, I would say that he brought the best out of Chris Smalling, as I said. So we had a good defender that we didn't know until then was a really good defender. But you would have to say in the first season, it's like we took one step forward. Where we knew that we had a side that was capable of playing good football. Then we shipped out some of the deadwood in the summer, and it's like we took 3 steps back in the second season when we just played this really basic, non-progressive formation with just a boring possession style of football, as Paul Scholes would say. One thing I would say about Van Gaal is that some of the United legends, like Paul Scholes, really did get on his back. And I do think that that didn't help his cause very much. So I think that they got on his back, and I think that some United fans are quite easily led by what's said. And I'm not saying that all Man United fans are, but there are certain sections of United fans that if a Man United legend says something, they'll hang on to it and they will believe that. Because those people are their heroes. Like, you look at Roy Keane, Paul Scholes, Paul Ince even. Some of these guys are heroes to United fans. So certain United fans will be almost brainwashed by what these pundits will say. So I think that that had an influence in Van Gaal being sacked. But yeah, if we're talking about the influence Van Gaal had on Man United, I think he brought through some good young players. But he almost undid a lot of it. He undid a lot of his own work by just making bad decisions, really. So that's what I would say about Louis van Gaal. That's the roundup. Right, now this is where it gets really interesting. So we've done David Moyes, the Everton manager that was out of his depth. We've done Louis van Gaal, the manager that was previously good for Barcelona, Bayern Munich, whose methods worked in a different time. So now we're going to a modern day manager whose methods are tried and tested, a serious winner who has won recently and often, and that would be Jose Mourinho. Everything that I've just said there would indicate that this man was a good appointment for the job. And in many ways he was. Me personally, I've never liked Mourinho as a manager. I've never liked his management style. I don't like him as a person. I don't like a lot of the things that he says. I think that he's an excuse maker. I think that he plays unnecessarily defensive football with a lot of the very good teams that he's had. However, I didn't like him as an appointment for Man United. But as I said before, I will always back a manager who United have decided to back. As a United fan, I will always back whatever manager is trying to make us successful, because what I want is us to be successful on the pitch, preferably playing a good brand of football. So, we just sort of evaluate, we've got to sort of compare Mourinho to both Louis van Gaal. So, both Louis van Gaal and Moyes. So, Mourinho was like Van Gaal in that he was bold and he had an idea that he believed in. He had sort of a prototypical set of players that he would want in the team. And obviously he was very different to, his preferences were quite different to what Van Gaal would want. So, Mourinho got rid of Daley Blind, the versatility player, completely pretty much sidelined Darmian and Schweinsteiger and Memphis Depay. Brought in Pogba and Eric Bailly and Mkhitaryan in his first season. He also brought in Ibrahimovic, who I actually thought at the time this is a good short-term signing. Let him play a few games and rotate with Anthony Martial and Rashford. However, that just didn't happen. He played Ibrahimovic in every single game. Again, Ibrahimovic had quite a long goal drought in that season where he still didn't decide to play Rashford up front. Ibrahimovic is a man that's in peak physical condition. Don't get me wrong when I'm saying that he shouldn't have played as many games. But this was a 36-year-old man that we had up front. A 36-year-old. And we had two young lions waiting to take their opportunity in Martial and Rashford. And he didn't really give them a chance to do so. They were always shafted onto either the left or the right wing. So I think that was, I wouldn't say that's a mistake, because that's what Mourinho believes in. He's a short-term manager. He believes in getting success now. He believes success should be at your fingertips. And I understand why, because every job that he's been in, he stays there for 3 years and then he moves somewhere else. That is the way he sees football. He sees it as a 3 or 4 year turnaround game, which in many ways is right. I don't necessarily disagree with him on that. So, I liked the appointment. I thought that Mourinho would win things for us. But I did worry about where he was what the long-term future was gonna hold if we had him as the manager. So these were my concerns at the start. So the thing that you've got to know about Mourinho is up to the time that he managed United, he'd almost had like a really successful second season. So with both Real Madrid and his second run with Chelsea, he'd done the same thing. He'd followed the same formula. So he came to a team that he didn't believe was quite right. He'd signed some players that he thought would make it right. And then over into the second season, that's when his main season would be. He would challenge for the league in that season. Then the third season, he'd fall out with everyone. So the last two high-profile jobs that he'd done that. I think he may have done that at Inter Milan as well, in fact. He fell out with people there in the third year also. So that's what I was expecting him to do. I wasn't expecting a league title in the first season, especially not with the squad that we had. So he'd got rid of a lot of Anel's signings anyway. So he was clearly trying to bring sort of put a different footnote on the team, if you like. What I would say about his first season is we weren't really on the receiving end of very many spankings in the way that Moyes and Van Gaal were. We didn't get thrashed in that first season. And Herrera probably had his best season for Man United that year. So I think in that first season, again, it was kind of like Van Gaal's first season. There was a lot of things that were very promising about it. So we knew that we had an incomplete team. So the fact that we didn't challenge the title for that season, it didn't worry me, and I don't think it worried many other United fans at the time, because we knew that he was trying to build things back up. Did I agree with all of his decisions, all of his signings, and all of the players that he sold? No, not necessarily. But I did think that he was moving it in a direction to where we would be successful, at least in the next season. So basically, we got to this position. We won the Europa League, so we won a trophy. So again, that's not to be underestimated, because again, trophies are special memories for fans. We'd actually never won the Europa League before, so Mourinho will always have that to his name. That is the only Man United manager ever to win the Europa League, or the UEFA Cup as it was previously known. We've never won that competition before. So I don't think people should. I do feel like people overlook that a little bit, and we shouldn't overlook it. So he did win the Europa League. He gave us some really good moments in the first year. We played some pretty good football, to be honest, with, as I've said, an incomplete team. I just didn't really like the way that he was managing Martial and Rashford, me personally, because I'm always a fan of young players. And as I say, I'm a big Anthony Martial fan. I was a fan of him from the first moment that he stepped on the pitch against Liverpool. So the fact that I felt Mourinho was mismanaging him, it didn't make me feel very good. But I felt good for the team overall. I felt like we were doing the right sort of things. So it was a mixed season. The league performances weren't overly consistent. If we hadn't won that Europa League, we wouldn't have qualified for the UCL, because we finished 5th. So we won the Europa League, qualified for that, and that was good stuff, because now that we qualified for the UCL, it's like we can challenge on all fronts now if we make the right signings. So he made 3 key signings in the summer after. So he'd signed Eric Bailly in his first season, who was a good signing. Like, it looked absolutely excellent, but had got injured for pretty much the rest of the season after his first 6 months. Second season, so in the second summer, he signed Pogba back in the first year, and then he signed Mkhitaryan as well. So these were all good signings that made our team look better on paper, definitely. So second season, he signs Lindelof, who, I didn't know anything about Lindelof, I'm not going to lie. I knew nothing about him, so I didn't know whether to comment on him, but I did trust sort of Mourinho's evaluation of defenders. He's always had good defenders in his teams, so I always trusted Mourinho's opinion on them sort of players. He also signed Matic, who I did like Matic as a player. I always liked him at Chelsea. I thought he was solid as a rock. I thought he had good passing ability for a defensive midfielder. He's obviously got a good long shot on him, and he's always in the right position to make tackles. So I liked Matic. I didn't especially like him as a signing because I thought he was getting on a bit. He was 29. He was never blessed with the most pace. So if he gets slower, this could be a problem. But nevertheless, as I've said, I'll always support players and managers who were with Man United at the time. We also signed Romelu Lukaku. It's a signing that I was not a fan of at all, I must admit. So, Romelu Lukaku, it was either, from what I understand, it was either going to be him or Morata that summer. That was like the limit of the players that United could get at the time, because we were a team that was building our way back up to the top. We weren't going to be able to get the very best, but it was like the next rung down. So that was sort of Morata and Lukaku were the two main ones that were available there. So, we end up signing Lukaku for 75 million. And I didn't really think too much of the price tag because that's just what you have to pay for players now, unfortunately. But I've never liked Lukaku as a player. I do think that when he's in form, he's great. He scores goals. He's a good box striker. He's very strong. He's very fast. He bullies defenders. But he has long runs without scoring. I've noticed that the entire time at Everton. And I didn't think that just because he was playing for a better team, that was going to change. He's a streaky striker. And he's always going to be a streaky striker. It just so happens as well that a lot of the times where he doesn't turn up, it happens to be in the biggest games. So I didn't particularly like the signing, but I supported it because I was like, he's a goal scorer and that is what we need. He does get goals. Even if he is going to be a flat track bully, that's what we need. So we signed those three players and I thought they were all pretty good signings for us. I thought that they were all, these are Mourinho signings. This feeds into the idea that he's trying to, sort of the stamp that he's trying to put on the team. Okay, fine. So we started off pretty good. So Herrera again was sort of getting the shaft, and that always seems to be the case in a lot of these situations. So they never see Herrera as the first choice at the start of the season, even when he proves otherwise. So we started off the season quite well with Matic and Pogba in a double pivot. We had Mkhitaryan at 10. We're playing, I believe, we're still playing sort of one of Rashford or Martial on the left, and then Lingard was playing a lot of the time on the right. Occasionally one Massa would come in any one of those three positions. So we started quite well, and we were playing really good football. And you know what? We looked, until a certain point, so I'd say from August to October, we looked like a team that was going to challenge for the league title. Matic had settled in really well. He was winning tackles. He looked like something that we'd been missing in the midfield for quite a few years. He added some serious bite. He was putting his foot in. He was just breaking up the play, making sure that all the attacking players could just do exactly what they wanted to do. Pogba was excellent as well, having been freed up by Matic. So Pogba played excellent in those first few games. Lukaku was scoring goals. And, Rashford and Martial were doing bits as well. So we get into October, and we're as United fans, we're feeling quite optimistic about the season. This is normally Mourinho's good season. This is the second season. This is where Mourinho normally wins things. And then that's when we sort of fell off. We fell off in around October time. We had I think we had 2 losses on October. One was a 1-0 loss to Chelsea, which I can live with. But then we lost 2-1 to Huddersfield. And that's just not acceptable. Not in the sort of season that it was. This was a season that Manchester City beat the points record. They got over 100 points. So even at this time of the year, we knew that it was going to be very difficult. If we were losing games like Huddersfield and Chelsea, even at the time we had 2 losses, we knew it was going to be very difficult to usurp Man City at the top of the league. We followed that up with a few wins in November, and then we ended up getting three draws in a row in December. 3 draws in a row. And Lukaku, during that time, went 15 games without scoring and still didn't get dropped. He still didn't get dropped. So Lukaku goes 15 games without scoring, even though he'd scored a lot of goals in the first few games. Let's not forget about that. But then Mourinho persisted with him because that was his guy and that was who he believed in. So Martial or Rashford, neither of them got a chance up front. And then to further compound issues, Mourinho makes the decision. Bearing in mind at this time, in January, we were 15 points behind Manchester City. 15 points. So, 15 points behind, and he decides to sign Alexis Sanchez in January. This was not a signing where you think this is the one that's going to turn it round. This is the one that's going to turn it round and make us win the league before the end of the season. Which is the only reason why you would sign a 29-year-old in January who's very expensive and has high wages. So we gave them Mkhitaryan for Sanchez, and then paid Sanchez about 500 grand a week or whatever it was. And that even further shafted Martial and Rashford. Because guess what, people? You sign a player that you're paying 450k a week to, you're going to fucking play him. You're not just going to sit him on the bench. But Anthony Martial, who was scoring a lot of goals at that time, he got completely shafted by that. And Rashford as well. So we'd already lost the league. We were 15 points behind City. There was no way we were going to win the league. So I think that was Mourinho's ego. He wanted to sign that player so that Man City couldn't have him, because he knew that Manchester City were in for him. And City were like, go on then, fine, have him. And that's the fundamental difference between the two clubs. And again, you can partially blame the board for this, and we'll get onto that in the later video. So, we signed Sanchez, and it was clear. I mean, to be honest, I'd been seeing for Arsenal that he wasn't quite at the races. So I'd been saying this is not a good signing. And, Arsenal fans that I knew at the time were saying the same thing. We were like, fine, take him. We're glad to be rid of him. He doesn't want to play for us anymore. So I was like, great. I mean, it wasn't all negative from that point outwards. So, let's be real. We had an inconsistent sort of January, February. We won most of our games. And then in March, we had a 5-game winning run, which included Chelsea, Liverpool and City. So those were, again, football is not just about success and results. It's about these good moments, these magical moments. And beating City and Liverpool for United is always like that. It's always good. And Chelsea's not bad either, to be fair. So I think we have to give Mourinho some credit for that. So we finished second with 86 points, which we have to say, in hindsight, in terms of what's happened since then with this team, was a very good season. It was a very good season. I think it was just disappointing not to... I mean, there were certain unforeseen factors, shall we say. Unforeseen factors that I will get onto in the next few videos that Mourinho potentially couldn't have controlled in that particular season. But if we were to win the league in any of the 3 seasons that he was there, it would have been this one. So it's always a disappointment whenever we come in second place to City. But if we look at their squad and then we look at ours, they had a much better team. And we can't really debate that they had a better team than us. But I do think when you're a coach like Mourinho and you play such a rigid style of football that doesn't always give players that much freedom to express themselves, I think as a player, if you see that style of football and then you see yourself getting beaten out by a team like Man City, who are consistently playing teams off the park, let's not make no bones about it, that season they were amazing. They're playing teams off the park all the time. So I think as a player, if you see that, you're going to think, part of you's going to think, fuck this shit. Why are we doing this ridiculous, why are we working so hard defensively and being put through this ridiculous, rigid regime for this arsehole. Because Mourinho was an arsehole to a lot of the players. He slated Martial. He slated Rashford. He said that Martial, Rashford, Lingard and Shaw, he said they weren't mature enough and that they didn't know how to compete. Which, for me, that's something that you can say to... Every manager has their own way of dealing with players. But I don't think slating players in public is ever a good way to do it. That's just my personal opinion. I don't think that's ever been something that's proved to work for any manager. So Ferguson would always protect his players. He would always protect them, but every player that's played under Ferguson who has spoken in the press has always said they were scared of him. Because they were scared of the dressing down that he would give them. So I'm not saying don't go into them. If they deserve to be criticised, then criticise them. But don't do it in front of the media, and then the media are writing about it and posting on social media about it and all that kind of shit. And he said that Luke Shaw lacked ambition. So you can see sort of things, you can imagine in this time that there's things that probably are piling up in the back of certain players' minds to where they don't necessarily like Mourinho that much already. They haven't won anything in this second season. They won the Europa League in the first season, but some of these players weren't a particularly important part of that in some cases. So the final season, this is where it does get quite interesting. So this was a 2018 to 19 season. So this is just last year. So the atmosphere was turning toxic, and you could see it. Because Mourinho lost his right-hand man, Rui Faria, who had actually been the first team coach of like all of his successful teams before. The Porto, Chelsea, Real Madrid, Inter Milan, Chelsea again. He'd been with him this whole time. And I think this is a contributing factor to why Mourinho had such a big downfall. So Mourinho, there started to be rumours of Pogba leaving that summer. And this in itself caused friction between Mourinho and Pogba. Particularly to do with Pogba's agent, who we all realise is a complete arsehole at this point. If people didn't realise it then, they certainly realise it now. Raiola is just there to disrupt. He's there to get better deals for his clients and ultimately himself. He doesn't care about football. He doesn't care about the clubs. He cares about getting the best deal for him, for Mino Raiola. So Mourinho fell out quite badly with both Pogba and Raiola, as I understand it. He made Pogba the vice-captain and then publicly announced that he was taking the vice-captaincy away from him. Publicly. To be totally honest, during pre-season, Mourinho's demeanour was really, really negative. You could see that his whole demeanour was just not there in the way that, the way that it had been before. He was not himself. And he'd been saying that his team was not good enough to win the league. He also implied on multiple occasions that he was not getting enough backing. He was saying that things like, oh, well, I had 5 players on my list. I'll be lucky if I get 1 player, but I really want 2 players, and all this kind of thing. And it would be stupid to suggest that doesn't impact on the morale of the players. He's basically saying, you lot are not good enough. He's saying that publicly. And you could tell that in his demeanour. He was grumpy as fuck all the time. Like, he carried this negative energy around with him that you must think if he's doing that on the training pitch and sort of around Carrington, that's got to be impacting the players. It just has to be. And this is where a lot of we come back to this sort of issue of the United legends. It didn't really play a factor in David Moyes' era because everyone was sort of like, let's see what happens with this guy. But in both Louis van Gaal and Mourinho's times at the club legends have not been shy about their opinions. Not at all. Like, Roy Keane was accusing Mourinho of just being too whingy and complaining about everything. And I think that with this whole with this whole Mourinho thing, so with the whole I'm not being backed, I don't have a good enough team, all of that, there's a couple of viewpoints that you can take on it. One viewpoint is he was right. The board should back the manager. If they've chosen that manager, they should back him whatever happens. They should always back the manager because they should put him in the best position possible to do a good job. However, the other school of thought would say, what are you doing with the players that you've got, Mr. Mourinho? Mr. Mourinho, why have you asked us to sign Nemanja Matic, who's approaching 30 years old, had 6 good months, and then is just pretty much loped around the pitch, doing nothing of use for the next 6 months? Mr. Mourinho, you wanted us to sign Romelu Lukaku. He's a flat-track bully who only scores against Burnley and Blackburn and teams of that sort of ilk. Mr. Mourinho, why aren't you able to get the best out of one of the world's best players in Paul Pogba? Mr. Mourinho, what's happened to Marcus Rashford since he burst onto the scene? Mr. Mourinho, what's happened to Anthony Martial, who looked like he was going to be one of the best players in the world? Mr. Mourinho, Eric Bailly, why does he keep getting injured? Why have you asked us to sign him when his injury record at Villarreal was terrible? Mr. Mourinho, why should we continue to back you when you've made all of these signings that clearly haven't worked out? We're still paying 450k for this Chilean who doesn't really give a shit if he's here or not. This Chilean who wanted to go to Manchester City. So these are some of the questions that, you have to level that at Mourinho, and some of those things are his fault. It is his responsibility to get his best out of the team. Like, some of his players, he was saying that his team was worse than Man City's team, which is understandable. But a lot of those are players that he chose to bring in. So, the players that are worse, Lukaku's not as good as Aguero, but Mourinho wanted to sign Lukaku. Sanchez is not as good as probably anyone that City have got on their team. Mourinho chose to sign him. Matic is not as good as Fernandinho. Mourinho chose to sign him. So, at some point, he has to answer for some of that himself. So, my personal opinion is that it's perfectly okay for the manager to complain about his backing, but to do it so publicly, I don't think he should have done. I think that sort of discussion should take place in a private scenario between Mourinho and Ed Woodward. When you come out and make it so public like that just gives the wrong impression to everyone. It gives the wrong impression to the players, gives the wrong impression to the press, and that just gave all these other stories about Pogba leaving and some of the other players being discontented and about having, a dressing room revolt. That just gave that so much more credence. And it didn't need to be like that. So, we ended up losing this season we lost 3 of our first 7 and only won 3 of our first 7. So it's like, we had that toxic atmosphere, we'd lost bare games, we already knew we weren't going to win the league, so then it just got worse from there. So, in roundup, this has been a very long review of Jose Mourinho. And I think that people may walk away from this video with the impression that I really don't like Jose. I didn't want him for United. But what I'm stating here are facts about what he has said and done. And I do believe I've given him his credit where credit is due. I think he brought toxicity into the atmosphere in this particular season that I'm talking about now. So in the 18 to 19 season, I believe he brought his own negative energy into the atmosphere, and I think that did impact the players and the team. I think it was there for all to see. I think the facts are basically there, and you can interpret them how you want. So, it was short-termism, in my opinion, that led to Mourinho's downfall at United. And he, I believe, took the team backwards from where LVG left it. I 100% believe that. He took the team backwards. If you look at LVG, we had some pretty promising things going on. Like, as I say, LVG had his own flaws and benefits. He had his own things that he was doing right and wrong. But I do believe he was taking the club to a position where we were moving forward because he was bringing through young players and giving them a chance. Whereas Mourinho took a lot of that away in view of short-term success. And then a lot of the players that he brought in didn't even want to be there. So I think Mourinho was very bad for this club in general. And I think he potentially didn't deserve to be sacked as much as some of the other people. Like, potentially didn't deserve to be sacked. He'd won the Europa League. He'd just finished second in the Premier League the season before. We were only about 7th or 8th. And it was a rescuable season. But I think it shows that it was a toxic atmosphere. And Jose was sacked after losing to Liverpool with an understanding from the club, the players and the fans that we needed to bring in a manager, again, kind of like Moyes to Van Gaal. We needed to bring someone in who was going to bring some positivity, something completely different to what we'd been having for the past 6 months. So this is where we are with our current manager, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. So again, this is a story that people have heard many times now. Solskjaer, incredible first 3 months. Man United were the best team in Europe for that first 3 months. I challenge anyone to argue with me on that. The facts say that we were the best team in that 3-month period. We won nearly every game. We were playing teams off the park, playing fast football, playing like Alex Ferguson football. We were incredible in that 3-month time. And the reason why, Ander Herrera came out in an interview and basically said that players were allowed to attack after Solskjaer came in. So I think Mourinho was being very restrictive, especially towards the end with his tactics. And Solskjaer was just saying to these players, go and express yourselves. Just freestyle it. Do what you're capable of. Whereas Mourinho's not like, no, we have to defend. We must defend, run. So Solskjaer made it fun again for these players. So we had this 3-month period, and to be honest, I think that it's only natural for fans at that point. We had that PSG game that was just absolutely heroic. We lost the first leg at home 2-0 in what I can only describe as a pathetic performance, to be honest. Lost that first leg at home 2-0. But then in the second leg, it wasn't a great footballing performance or anything. There was just so much grit and grind in there. We got the early goal. PSG got one back. But then we got 2 late-arse goals and managed to do them over on their own turf. And that was incredible. And again, this is another sort of theme that I'm coming back to is memories. And I think what Solskjaer lacks in other areas, I think he's given us plenty of sort of memories in big games, like games that on a one-off basis we can be happy with, like games that we will not forget. He's doubled Pep Guardiola this season. Anyway, I'm gonna go through this in chronological order. So he had anti-Mourinho'd it for 3 months, and then everything started to go downhill after that PSG game. So after PSG, we lost to Arsenal. And this was after Solskjaer had been made permanent. Everyone was calling for it. But the more cautious people amongst us were saying, no, leave it a bit longer. And I do think leaving a bit longer, in hindsight, was defo the right thing to do. If we'd have left it longer, then I think we'd have finished Champions League next season. The honeymoon period would have extended by sort of maybe 2 or 3 weeks. We could have continued playing well like we were playing. We wouldn't have had the pressure of Ole being the permanent manager. and then we would have ended up, we probably would have finished top 4. Let's just say it like that. We would have finished top 4. That hadn't have happened, but he gets made permanent. We lose 2 of our last 9 Premier League games. Well, sorry, we only won 2 of our last 9 Premier League games. So now we're in a position where some United fans are doubting Solskjaer, but here's the thing. United legends, so Keane, Scholes, all of them people, Giggs, they will all say, give Solskjaer more time. And they have said that, and they will continue to say that. They will all say that. And that means that you won't have, the only fans that are going to turn on him are very sort of logical, pragmatic fans. The fans that think with their emotions and are led by what other people say, they're going to want Solskjaer to stay. So that's an advantage that Solskjaer's always going to have in his corner. So, I think the question that has been asked of Solskjaer this season, is now moving on to this season. So he made 3, I don't want to say good signings, I would say astute signings. He signed Harry Maguire for 80 million, who, he's overpaid for him there. But I think we always knew that was going to be the case with England's best centre-back. You're always going to overpay for that player. Dan James, still jury's out really, very young, very promising, but has been clearly inconsistent this season. Wan-Bissaka, one of the best right-backs in the world for me. Certainly defensively, I don't know anyone that's better. I don't think there is anyone better defensively than Wan-Bissaka, as far as a right-back at this point in time. So, what I would say about Solskjaer is he's reinforced the fact that we have an idea where we want to bring through young players. We want it to be made from a combination of the academy and experienced stars. And this is what Woodward keeps saying. And I do think this is what Ollie's idea is. I do think that's Ollie's idea. I just don't know if he knows how to implement it as far as tactically as a manager. Because let's face it, we've been playing some very dead football this season. He's been playing that same style of play that Van Gaal plays, that 4-2-3-1 with 2 sitting midfielders just standing there playing the ball side to side and just keeping the ball. We've had so many games this season where, because we can't counter-attack teams, we don't have a way of opening them up. Because we don't have a way of playing intelligent possession football that's actually creative and can get a way through. There's no triangles, there's no sort of clever flicks, there's no clever movement. There's nothing like that. What I would also say is that he makes himself look a bit stupid and naive with some of the things that he says in press conferences. He does look a bit like a man out of his depth. He does. He came out and said about Erling Haaland, he said he knows where he wants to go. He knows where he wants to go. And we know where he wants to go. Basically all but saying Haaland's going to be a Man United player by the end of this window. Then literally the next week Haaland reveals that he's going to Borussia Dortmund. And he ends up even trolling us on social media. So I think that was very embarrassing for Ole. He also talks about youth, but then he doesn't play Angel Gomez, possibly the most promising young player that we even have. The issue that I also feel like Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has is that he's always going to just do what they say. He's always going to do what the Glazers say. He's never going to challenge them because he's just happy to be there. He's happy to be the manager of Manchester United because he desperately wants to be that guy that turns it around. But my fear is that he's not capable of being that guy. And he's got too much pride to walk out and say, I'm not the right man for this job. He has too much pride to do that. I must admit, in better years of the Premier League, the Premier League's been fucking shocking this season. It's been awful. So Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, I would say, has been very fortunate to be involved with this Premier League because some of these games that he's lost, he would have been sacked already in other Premier League years. But as it happens, we're 3 points. We're 3 points off of 4th. Coronavirus has hit the entire world. We don't even know what's happening next. But, if we do somehow manage to resume the season, there's a good chance we end up in the Champions League. Because City also have a UCL ban. So there's a pretty good chance we end up in the UCL. So this is the thing. I've just said something that I fundamentally disagree with, in that he's lucky to be in the season that he is. He's lucky to be against this particular Premier League because this Premier League shot it. But guess what? It's not stopping people saying that Liverpool are the best team in the world. And they're one of the best teams ever. Even though they're playing in this fucking dog shit Premier League. So, I think that you have to take that with a pinch of salt, because you can only play against what you're up against. So you have to judge it on where he is rather than the amount of points that he's got. And he is close to the Champions League, so regardless of if he could end up with less points than David Moyes. It's very feasible at this point. He could end up with less. But if he ends up with less points than David Moyes and gets into the Champions League, I'm sorry, but it's a better season than what David Moyes had. Because it's not about points, it's about what you achieve. So these people talking about points that we've got is stupid. It's a redundant argument. So, for me, on Solskjaer, there's some good things. There are some good things. He's created some feel-good moments. We've doubled City this season. Like Cardiff City manager, who was managing Molde FC in Norway, has just masterminded the Messiah Pep Guardiola, the alleged best manager of all time. He's a fraud. Let me just say that right now. He's a fraud. So, it is a bad style of play at the moment. But what we can potentially say is that injuries have made things very difficult for Solskjaer. We've had McTominay and Pogba injured for most of the season, collectively. We had Martial out for 2 months. We've now had Rashford out for 2 months. So, to still be in a chance with the champions, of being in the Champions League, I think that's okay for the moment. And I think we have to use that as the measuring stick. I think it has to be as simple as, if Solskjaer gets Champions League, he stays. If he doesn't, then he's out. It has to be. I'm sorry. I know there's some people that think that we should get rid of him regardless. But I can't agree with that. If we have all these injuries and we still make it into the Champions League, then he's got the promise of turning it around. And we've seen since the signing of Bruno Fernandes that the mood in the team has picked up. You can see there's something different. There's a swagger about the way we're playing. There's the arrogance that we should have. And I think what this shows about Solskjaer, regardless of what you think of him as a tactician, and I'm not saying that he is a good tactician, because I don't think that he is. I don't think he's a good tactician. I don't think McKenna's a good tactician. And I don't think that Carrick's a good tactician. I think they're all out of their depth at a world level when it comes to coaching, all of them. But what I would say is that Solskjaer has proved that he's capable of installing belief in players. When it comes to individual man management, I think that he has got the best out of certain players where Mourinho and Van Gaal failed to. He's got the best out of Rashford. This is the best season Rashford's ever had by a long way. Got the best out of Fred. He's got the best out of Martial. Or at least the best since that first season Martial had. So, he's got the best out of quite a few players. So I think we have to see that as a positive thing. And whether he's the man to get us back to the top, I really don't know. I don't think, in terms of... This is a bit of an era where it's not really about just managing anymore. It's like a lot of running of the club and stuff like that is done by other people. So then it's just about your coaching. Is his pure coaching good enough to get us to the summit of football? Probably not. It probably isn't. He's not that good of a coach. We're not that creative under him. But if you can have a 4-3-3 midfield with Fred at the base as a number 6, and then Bruno and Pogba as very advanced box-to-box players, and then if we get a quality right winger in this summer, and then have Rashford on the left and Martial up front, suddenly that's a very devastating attacking team. And if he can't play good football with that, then he shouldn't be the manager of Manchester United. And that's what's going to define it. It's all up in the air with the coronavirus, but I do believe they will try to find a way to finish out this season. If and when they do, we will see what Solskjaer's really made of. Because when Pogba's fit, and we've got more creativity than just one player in our team, we'll see what football that team's capable of playing. Right, it's been a long-ass video, this has. I'm sorry for the length of it. I did not intend it for it to be this long. So I am going to wrap it up now. I believe that Solskjaer so far has had a positive influence on the team. Overall. He's had a positive influence as far as he's allowing players to play with confidence. But he's not had a positive influence on the success of the club. He's not necessarily the man to take us to where we need to be. But he's had a good influence. As far as certain players are playing better. Mourinho's the opposite of that. He took us to quite a successful part. He took us to second in the league. He took us to winning the Europa League. But he took the team backwards from when he got it. That team that he inherited was better than the team that he left. I 100% believe that. The facts are there. They support the facts are there to support what I've just said. Louis van Gaal, again, I think it's more or less stationary. He did some really good things, and then he undid that. David Moyes was just a man who was taking on an impossible job, and he was out of his depth. These are my opinions. I've ranted on for nearly an hour and a half about them, so I would like to hear yours. So please leave your opinions in the comment section below, and I'd appreciate it very much if you subscribe to this ranting, raving channel and like the video, because that will really help me out.